And welcome back, Fourth and Long fans. It's your footy correspondent, Coach Donnie Hess here, back with another off-season supporter series. And as I told ladies and gentlemen, we are wanting to talk with some state league fans. So here we go. Let's talk to another one coming to us from Perth, West Australia. We have Ian. Ian, thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, g'day, Donnie, and thank you so much for your interest in the WAFL and the WAFL teams. It's heartening to have someone from so far away showing a genuine interest in our competition.
I truly appreciate it, and I've told a few of you guys that have started. I think I'm working on something with my normal show that I do normally during the season. That I think we're going to be trying to do a catch-up show with each of the leagues, with VFL, with Sandful, and Waffle, with catching an expert, kind of talking about how the a couple of weeks plays going. So I'm really excited to be able to talk about not only the AFL, the AFLW, but now Sandful, Waffle, and VFL as well. So let's jump right into it. Before we get to the footy, we are on a footy show, but I kind of like knowing just a little bit about the person that I'm talking with outside of footy. So just a real quick bio of who you are outside of the game of football.
Yeah, so I actually live in a place called Cagley Boulder, which is 600 k's east of Perth. So I don't get to Perth too often. So I suppose in miles, what would that be? About 420, 440 miles or something like that
Something to that
from
effect, yeah.
Perth. Um, so I do finance broking. So mortgages and loans is my occupation. I dabble in a little bit of this. So I call the local football here, or I have done it on the local radio here in Cal, done a few podcasts. I'm just so hugely interested in sport. I love all aspects of sport, as we were talking before we hit record about the massive weekend we've had here in Western Australia with the Perth Scorchers winning the most amazing Big Bash cricket final on Saturday night into the Wildcats qualifying for a basketball shot at the finals after doing it for like 35 years in a row. They missed out last year and they're back on the horse, the Perth Wildcats. And then we had the Perth Heat lose the baseball grand final to the Adelaide Giants. So it's been when you say off season, it certainly is for football, but I think you'll find with most Australians and particularly West Australians, sport is a 365-day event, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I know you love your cricket, and the Scorchers are definitely worth supporting. As I told you off air, I have a co-coach and mentor who is an absolutely massive Scorchers fan. That I know he was super excited. I got several messages when Perth when the Scorchers won their champion their big bash final that he was very excited. So absolutely love it. All right, so we'll jump into it. This is a footy podcast. So I want to talk some footy. But I always like asking this question because you grew up with it. You grew up with this sport in mad WA where footy is king there. What is your favorite thing about the sport of football?
Gee, that is a good question. Everything. Everything. The movement of the ball, the colours of the teams, the numbers on their back, the scoring. It's just a whole package. I was brought up in a little town, Donnie, called Manjimup, which is about 300 k's south of Perth, and our zone was East Perth, and I got given an East Perth jumper. Maybe when I was 6 or 7 or thereabouts. It was a rustic old woolen thing with the black at the top and the blue at the bottom. It had number 9 on the back, big white number 9, and I wouldn't take it off. Mum just had to prize it off me. I just wore it every day I could, and developed a love for the colours of black and blue, and then obviously that evolved into East Perth, having been the zone that we were living in. I think now that I'm an adult, I'm president of the local football club here in Cagley Boulder called Railways, and I love now seeing the other end of it, just the enjoyment that people get. That I think everyone will say this, that 10 or 15 minutes after every game, win, lose or draw, that moment in the change rooms where you're all together, you're either celebrating or you're talking about the loss or what you can do better, having a quiet beer and just enjoying that fellowship. I mean, that's something from my playing days to now long past it. That it's something about Aussie rules which is just so unique and rare, and it's something I cherish. So I'm not sure if I've even answered your question, Donnie, but put it this way, mate, I love the sport of Aussie rules.
You're not the first one to go on that. I absolutely love it. It's the passion. It's the passion. I absolutely love it. It's the reason that I wanted to do this series because I like hearing. I mean, the AFL has a little bit of the corporate behind it. There's so much money and all that. So to get to hear the passion for the state leagues, because I know sometimes for a lot of fans, they are kind of disrespected by the AFL because of the way that the midseason drafts and the way that they kind of do take the Colts, the young players, the under 18s, forwards and kind of snatch them up in the draft. So I love hearing that passion. It's absolutely fantastic. So we'll stay into it. I want to go off that passion. Go back into that memory bank of yours. Can you remember your earliest footy memory?
Yeah, it would have been watching ABC TV. Obviously, the national broadcaster was always a big supporter of all things sport and particularly local football. And growing up in Manjimup up in the winter, Donnie, she rains and it rains a hell of a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously, there wasn't a lot of chance for being outside. So come 2:15 on a Saturday afternoon, the ABC TV would fire it up and there'd be a game of WAFL on. And in those days, they never promoted who would be on. It just 2:15 will be WAFL. So whether it was East Perth or East Fremantle or Subiaco Perth or South and Swans, it was just like winning the lottery that when the TV was doing all their bits and pieces and bang, here we are today live from Bassendean Oval or Subiaco Oval or Perth Oval. And then you had your two combatants for the afternoon. And I'll just sit there and watch it. I mean, as much as I love East Perth, I love the competition of the WAFL, just the makeup of the teams, the history of it over such a long period of time. So I couldn't care less whether it was Perth and Subi playing or Swans or South. Obviously, if East Perth were playing, that was next level, Donnie. But that was probably one of my earliest memories. And obviously then that evolved into listening to the radio. We had 4 or 5 radio stations and be covering, every game. So if it was a nice day, then I'd be out the back kicking the footy around, listening to it and having my own little competition out there, pretending that, East Perth were playing Swans or whatever. So, yeah, I really... it's nice to get you go back and retrieve some of these memories, Donnie. But little cold wintry place called Manjimup. You had to be inside from time to time, and up come the WAFL on the TV. It was magic.
Fantastic, fantastic. And my next question, you've kind of answered it a little bit. So East Perth is your club, but I'm always fascinated on how you become a supporter of it. So was it specifically because of where you lived, or was there a family trait of what was the reason why you became an East Perth supporter?
Now, it was from receiving that Guernsey and then sort of understanding what that Guernsey meant. And I suppose it just fell into place that East Perth Manjimup was the East Perth zone. I suppose hence that's why I got the jumper from a family member. He might have got it from a clinic or something like that. So no, it just all sort of rolled into place. Now, unfortunately, my late father, I didn't follow any of the teams he supported. It must have grounded him actually. Like he was a mad East Fremantle supporter, and he followed Geelong and then West Coast in the AFL. And I didn't follow any of those locally. I started out at his club, and then I went and played somewhere else. So maybe I'm just a bit of a dance to my own beat. But I'm the only one in the family that barracks for East Perth. I'm the only one in the family that barracks for the Melbourne Footy Club. I just beat on my own drum, maybe, Donnie. That's what it is.
Hey, there's nothing wrong with that. I'll tell you this: when I did my AFL supporter series last year, I'll go to South Australia, and I talked to a gentleman who is a mad Port Adelaide supporter. His entire family was Adelaide supporters. So he was the black sheep of the family and he loved it. He embraced it. In fact, he joked with me a couple of times. He says, if you heard my brother and I talk about Adelaide, Port Adelaide, he said, you'd think we're enemies. You wouldn't think we were brothers. Like it was one of the funniest conversations I've ever heard, which I absolutely thought was fantastic because the passion and the banter, which I think is a great transition for this next one. As you said, you're kind of the lone wolf. You're the only East Perth supporter. So some of your other family members, they support other clubs. How is the banter when your teams play each other?
Magnificent. My dad was a bit of a sook, though. If East Fremantle got done by East Perth, he didn't see him. He was out the back cutting wood or doing something else. But conversely, if East Perth got rolled, I was probably nowhere to be seen. And that Monday recess at school was the most important 10 minutes of the week because if your team had a win on the weekend, you just marched into school and you were high and mighty. But if your team had suffered a defeat, and particularly in those days to South Fremantle, because a lot of my friends went for South Fremantle, well, then you were just trying to duck and weave. The banter is amazing, and I think that's one good thing that all Aussies tend to have, and particularly around sport. And the fact you said before about the Port Adelaide and the Adelaide supporter, I think that's one great thing about all our comps, whether it's AFL, SANFL or WAFL or the VFL. Nothing beats watching maybe a family of 5, maybe 3 young kids and mum and dad. And, 2 of them will be wearing one set of colours and the other 3 or vice versa will be wearing the other colours. They can all go to the footy together. They can all sit together. We're not barriered off where you've got X amount of supporters over there and you've got the other supporters there. We can all sit together. And generally, we all get on. Now, obviously, there's a few nuffs out there that take things a little bit too far when they're supporting their teams, but we can all interact with each other. And then nothing beats that beer after the game, win, lose, or draw. And generally, the winner, that's where the banter starts. And you've just got to cop it on the chin if you've had a loss, or you're playing cover drives and hook shots if you won.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, definitely for sure. And the best part is that you can joke with them about who's shouting the beers for sure.
Definitely.
All righty. So I love asking this again, as you kind of stated, you complimented me on wanting to know this. So I'm trying to learn a little bit because I've been diving into the history. Thankfully I've had found some great connections to learn about these clubs because they do have some rich histories. So just a little bit of what you know. Can you tell me a little bit of the history of East Perth?
Yeah, absolutely. Like 1906 was our first year. We came out of the Unions team, which had played, I think, 3 or 4 seasons in the WAFL. We won our first game, very first game that we played, which was nice. Since then, we've evolved to 17 premierships, but also 16 times runners up. So thankfully, we're going a little better than 50% in the major games. But we did have a period there where we lost 4 grand finals in a row in the 60s and then lost in 1971, just to rub that in. But fortunately, we snared a couple of flags in 72 and 78, and then she was Baron Donnie. There was not much going on in the 80s and 90s. We got close a few times. We had lots of trouble getting past the first semi-final in the 80s. We played one of the great grand finals in 1996 against Claremont, lost by 2 points. And do you know how, as a supporter, if your team wins and you haven't been able to watch it live, you can't wait to get home and watch the replay?
Mm-hmm.
I've watched the 1996 grand final a dozen times. It is one of the greatest games of football. We didn't win. Sadly, we didn't win, but it's just an absolute mighty game of football. And then, fortunately, 2000, 2001 and 2002, we got to have the Holy Grail with 3 in a row. So that was magnificent. I was lucky enough to get to Perth and to Subiaco Oval to watch all those 3. We then lost in 2013 to West Perth. This was just before the West Coast alignment started to take hold, which I'd like to talk about as we go forward, because that was a moment in our history that we needed to do financially, but it wasn't great to be a supporter of East Perth during those days when it was really half your club that you were sort of barracking for. And then 2014, we lost under the full alignment with the West Coast Eagles. And unfortunately, I think for a lot of East Perth supporters, they're probably kind of happy that we didn't actually win that grand final, because it probably would have had an asterisk against it for the rest of our history. And those who want to play the banter game, they'll probably say 2000, 2001 has asterisks against it when we had some sort of alignment with the interstate players with the West Coast Eagles. But 2002, she was fully fledged East Perth, and we belted West Perth, our arch rival. 1 goal they'd kicked at half time, and not to put a finer point on it, Donnie, that's given his movement downstairs thinking about the 2002 grand final when we give West Perth a new one.
Absolutely love it. And actually that's a great transition, because one of the things in my first episode I did West Perth, and I forgot to ask, who would you consider as East Perth's biggest rival, and then why?
Well, it's absolutely West Perth. There's no doubt about that. So the Derby, as we call them, not Derby, it's Derby here in Western Australia. So obviously all these competitions back in the past started from intercity suburbs and all that sort of stuff. So East Perth, West Perth, obviously it goes without saying that one's on one side of the city and one's on the other. They were the days where West Perth played at Leederville Oval and we were playing at Perth Oval. And I think just from the get-go, the Perth Derby as it is, and sadly, we've got a team called Perth that doesn't have a derby, but that's where it all developed, and it's been ongoing forever, to the point where East Perth won a wooden spoon in 2018, and some clown at Joondalup hit the derby, thought he'd bring a couple of wooden spoons along just to show the East Perth supporters. So that was probably banter to next level. I would have loved to have done it the other way around, but the East Perth faithful didn't take too kindly to that, but the West Perth folk got a whole lot of mirth out of it, so good on them. It's just the rivalry. I suppose it also comes back to one of the greatest Australian rules players ever, Graham Polly-Farmer. You've probably heard the name. He played the premiership for Geelong, premierships for East Perth, but he went to West Perth when he came back from his stint at Geelong in, I think, 1969. So he played in, I think, 2 premierships against East Perth. And I dare say that would have heightened whatever rivalries between the two clubs had. And she stayed right through to no doubt 2023, and we have a great long weekend here in Western Australia, WA Day, and that's where East Perth play West Perth, alternate the venues, and East Fremantle play South Fremantle. It's a real showcase of WAFL football that particular weekend. So hopefully we can get one over those West Perth Falcons, the reigning premiers as they are, in 2023, Donnie. Have I summed it up all right, mate?
That is perfect. Absolutely love it. I absolutely love the passion. That is fantastic. I absolutely love it. All right. So my next question that I have in here, you technically already answered it, but I love the story. Is I always like knowing what's the first item that you were given or bought, and you said it was that Guernsey, and you said you still have it, correct?
Oh, I don't have it anymore, but I had it for a very long, long time. But I have other East Perth Guernseys with number 9 on it. And out of that, having number 9, I think when I was very young watching the football, I became mesmerised by a gentleman called Larry Kickett, who played
Mhm.
for East Perth and fell in love not only then with East Perth because of the colours and the Guernsey, but just fell in love with Larry Kickett, the player. And he had a long and distinguished career at East Perth, 158 games, played in the 1978 Premiership. But in the early 80s, East Perth were in a little bit of strife financially, and I think they'd signed some players on contracts that maybe they shouldn't have, and they were running out a bit of coin. So we had a bit of an exodus of real quality players from East Perth, and sadly Larry Kickett was one of those. I think I cried my way to school and back home that day when I learnt that he transferred to Claremont. And he was just such a beautiful player, Donnie. He could have played AFL. He had such fine skills, like a lot of the Indigenous players do have. When he bounced the ball, it was graceful. When he kicked the ball, it was delightful. And he kicked a goal in the 1979 first semi-final, which sadly we lost as the reigning premier the year before. But it was almost like 14 rows back in the grandstand at Subiaco. That's how tight the angle was. And the ball just magnificently sailed through. And sadly, Fremantle kicked one up the other end to win the game. But he's a true champion of the East Perth Footy Club, and I love him, Larry Kiggett.
Awesome, awesome, absolutely love it. And in my favorite thing about this next question that I'm going to ask you is because you've really kind of shown it the entire time is I like knowing about how people fan, how people support, because being a fan, no matter where you are in the world, it's the most unique thing because you have a passion for something that you're invested in something that it can sometimes give you joy in the weirdest of ways. I mean, I had one podcast earlier that I think you'll listen to a little bit, the Melbourne Demons podcast, where his wife told him that he says, I wish I could bring you as much joy as when the Demons win a game. So I love hearing those stories. So I would love to hear you describe to me your fandom for East Perth, because I mean, you showed so much passion and I absolutely love it, but I just want to hear it in words a little bit. Describe your fandom. Is this one of those, you go to every game you possibly can? If you can't make it to the game, you have to listen to it on the radio, or can you step away from it a little bit and at least have a little bit of breathing room?
Yeah, I can have breathing room because, as I said, as much as I love my club, I love the competition, the WAFL, and obviously it's taken a few batters, with the introduction of the Eagles and the Dockers.
Mhm.
As I said, I live so far away from Perth, so I do get to maybe 1 or 2 East Perth games a year, which I treat as a joy. And this is probably one of the comparisons to going to an AFL game to a WAFL game, where obviously the AFL game, you've got your allocated seat and there's so many rules. You can't do this, you can't do that. Well, you go to Leederville Oval to watch the rules where we are based now. You can drink a can of beer if you like. You can drink a full-strength beer if you like. Sit in the members with the other East Perth folk. You can move around. So let's just say if you wanted to sit at that end of the ground for a bit, you can do that, or sit at the other end. It's just so casual. And the football itself is so good because there's not so much aspect on defensive football and tagging and all that sort of stuff. So it does free flow. And the skills of the WAFL players are really, really good. I mean, as they are all in state leagues. And obviously once they hit the AFL with that extra training and all the support and benefits that AFL clubs, it goes next level. But
Mhm.
this is a really, 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 really good competition. So to get to watch to an East Perth game, I take it as a privilege. As I said, maybe 1 or 2 games a year that I get to. I wear my membership with pride. You kit up in as much merch as you can find, and go along and support them. Donnie, the last game I saw, which was last year, East Perth and Subiaco. Now, Subiaco have been mighty here for decades now in the WAFL. They've won their 14 flags, so they're just sort of snipping at the heels of East Perth. But scores were level. with not much long time to go. And being from Calgary Boulder, a lot of our people play for Subiaco because Subiaco's our zone club here. So I've got a lot of people I know there. Ball comes into the forward line. The son of a great mate of mine tried to take mark of the century and didn't even lay hands on the ball. And it just happened to be a Subi bloke at the front. Just volleyed it off his left foot and it hit the point post. So now they're 1 point up. We go to kick out, siren goes. So I've gone from, probably taking 2 points as I would, but then I'm watching my team lose by 1 point. Yeah, little tear come out of my eye, but what a great game of footy. Really good game of footy.
Yeah, that's another thing too, is that when you can admire a great game, like I've walked away from some Swans games, a huge Swans supporter, and I've went, man, that was a good game of football. It was tough to watch, but like the grand final, everybody's like, how depressed were you? I'm like, it was almost an honor to watch that Cats team, like legitimate. I told some people, I have a lot of Cats supporters who are mates of mine, and I literally went, I said, you guys were just better. I mean, there's just no other way to say it. It was an honor to watch that Cats team play. Yes, they were dismantling my team, but holy criminally was that just a joy to watch footy, almost perfection personified. And to see somebody like Joel Selwood, who, I mean, he's absolutely a legend with what he has done, absolute warrior, puts his body on the line. Does he do a few things that I wish he wouldn't? Maybe, but I'm going to respect the guy an absolute shit ton. So I took it as an honor. It was frustrating because I think that Swans team was so much better than the performance, but it was an honor to watch that game. Was it as entertaining as many neutrals probably wanted it to be? No, it wasn't. But it was an honor to watch that Cats team win a premiership for sure. So I know kind of how you feel there. Not as close, but I exactly. I kind of it was devastating, but just an honor, just an absolute honor. So you might have already brought this one up. I just want to double check on this. Can you remember the first East Perth game that you attended live?
Yeah, I can actually. It would have been in the mid 80s, and I would have pestered Dad forever. Can we go to Perth on a Saturday? Can we go to Perth on a Saturday? And he must have gave in one day. As I said, he wasn't an East Perth supporter, but it was East Perth versus Claremont at Claremont Oval. Now, Claremont Oval's gone through some massive redevelopments in recent times. So this is good old Claremont Oval, grass banks and, the old stand that they had. And we had a wonderful player coming towards the end of his career called Peter Spencer, who won a Sandover medal and played at North Melbourne, and just a really super player for East Perth. But he was coming towards the end of his career. I remember distinctly he was wearing a helmet. He was wearing chest pads. He was wearing thigh pads. His knees might have been taped up. I've never seen a person run out in a footy field with so much gear on to give him some protection. Again, I think we lost the game, 14 points or something like that. But just the roar of the crowd, I mean, they're probably in those days, 6, 7, 8,000 people used to regularly attend sort of, just the basic home and away games, sometimes even more than that. And, we're sitting under the scoreboard and, you turn around to the scoreboard and you've got the, around the grounds, the other scores on that. Not that I was into racing in those days, but they'd have the racing results up on the scoreboard. This manually operated thing had so much information and so much things going on. So that was almost as mesmerising as watching the mighty Black and Blues out there taking on Claremont, who were a very, very good team in the 80s. So, that was my first game. I think it was 1984, somewhere like that.
Awesome. All right. And then I love this. I love my next question I have. And again, you have such a passion in the history of this. So this will be interesting. Can you narrow it down to one? Do you have a favorite player that's ever worn the the Royals jumper in the past? And do you have a current favorite player on the Royals list?
Actually, I can do all three of those. So my favourite ever player, no longer playing, as I mentioned before, was Larry Kickett. He was an absolute wonderful player. Player who's now retired, and he also went to another club, but he was a great character, and we have some banter on Twitter and the like. But Freddie Clutterbuck for the Royals played over 100 games. He ended up going to Swan Districts as part of the most recent West Coast Alliance, as a lot of players did, sadly. So I've got no blue at all that Freddie went on to another club. But during his East Perth period of time, he was wonderful. And then I suppose, from a current day playing point of view, we've got a lot of young people that are coming through. We just had our captain, Jackson Ramsey, retire. I used to really admire the way he went about it. So, it'd be interesting. 2023, we're in a real transition point, I suppose, the Royals. I can see we've done some recruiting, and as every other club does. But yeah, my new favourite is to be advised. So I'm looking forward to seeing what new players we've got coming through the Royals.
Yeah, it's got to be exciting. Sometimes when you go through a change. Sometimes it is exciting to see what's going to come up next and how things kind of change a little bit. So, all right, my favorite question when it comes to these, because I always see a sparkle in their eyes when I ask this. Most memorable moment as an East Perth supporter.
There's many, but I think I mentioned it before. The 2002 Grand Final, which was the third one in a row. Again, because it was against West Perth. Again, because the alignment had ended with the West Coast Eagles. So it was just an East Perth versus West Perth, Subiaco Oval. I think grand finals in those days would sort of average getting sort of 20, 21,000 people attend. I think there was nearly 30,000 people there that day. The capacity of Subi was about 43, but that was the status of the WAFL at that moment in time. I think West Perth kicked the first goal of the day. I'm pretty sure they did, actually. And come half time, they were still on one goal. I think come halfway through the fourth quarter, they might have still been on one goal. I think they finished on 4 at the end of the day, and I think we won by an even 60 points. That was the most magical day. Having been to 2000 and 2001, I mean, to break that drought in 2000 against East Fremantle was amazing. But, Donnie, because it was West Perth, we'll have to say it was that Derby Grand Final when we tore them a new one.
Fantastic. Again, like I said, I love that because I can see the sparkle in your eye when I ask that question. But my favorite part about it is that sometimes the most memorable moment, it's not just a grand final. Sometimes it's a certain specific game that just pops out in their head. All right. So we go from the past. We've talked a lot about the past. Let's go to a little bit more of the present. This last WAFL season, right now we're in the off season again. The WAFL primarily tends to play around the same time as the AFL. So I wanted to look because when I asked my question, I want to ask a question and then kind of feel sad about this. So I dove into how West Perth did last year. And as you kind of said, they did not have as good a season last year, went 6-12. So not as great as you probably would like it again. But as you said, you're kind of in a transition. So what were your thoughts on East Perth last year? I mean, 6 wins, eighth place on the ladder. Again, West Coast was absolutely anemic both in the AFL and the WAFL, so they were kind of
How
an
good was
easy
that?
win. But you look at it like this: is that did you see positive changes in the season? Did you see progression, or was it just kind of a struggle season entirely?
Yeah, it was a bit of all of that, to be honest. Jeremy Barnard, who was captain of our triple premiership team, was our coach, and he stepped down, I think, with about 3 or 4 games to go. So we've got a guy called Ross McQueen who's going to come in as our coach for 2023, and really excited by that. Ross has got a great resume. So yeah, I think the performance of the team, I think we won our first 2 games, which I can't recall the last time we did that. So there was some much buoyancy and hope there after the first 2, but yeah, to struggle through the rest of the season, and there was some pretty big losses there as well. But again, I think East Perth understand where they are. You know, we've had so many alignments. I think we've had 3 alignments in the last 20 years at various times. So I think everyone at East Perth loves that we are our own identity again, where it was a real struggle when there was the connection with the West Coast Eagles. So I think you're fine, but maybe we're a little bit more patient because of that, because we know that as soon as that alignment did end, that there was going to be taking a bit of time of transition. So as anyone would say this time of year, I mean, the noise coming out of the club all sounds pretty positive. We've picked up a couple of players along the way, and yeah, look, I'm not saying there's no premierships for East Perth in 2023. I can't see that happening, but just some improvement from the 6 games to 8 or 9, and maybe sneak for a finals appearance. That would be wonderful. So good things happen to those that wait, Donnie, I think is the quote. So I think us Royals are a little bit in that stage at the moment. Do this in 2 or 3 years' time, I reckon I'll be saying something different.
I can 100% understand that. I know the feeling. In 2020 and 21 were seasons, especially as a Swans fan, I kind of looked and I went, oh boy. But it was interesting that I think some of us had kind of put ourselves in that place, was when we went into 2022 was, do we still sit outside the finals? And then they made the finals, and it kind of it changed expectations or thoughts a little bit. So I know exactly how you feel. Sometimes a couple of bad seasons, sometimes just little bit of changes here or there. We'll have to see. Again, WAFL is a completely different animal than the AFL when it comes to drafts and everything like that. So, which is actually a great transition. And you kind of talked about a little bit. Do you keep an eye on the Royals offseason? Because again, unlike the AFL, you don't have a draft. You don't have the sign and trade period. You pretty much have sign delisted guys, pick up free agents where you can, and then just kind of go and hope you maintain a lot of your list. So do you keep an eye on the offseason? If so, what are your thoughts on the East Perth? As you kind of said, they did bring in a couple of guys over this offseason.
Yeah, no, it's good, I suppose, because it's not a strict trade period and so forth like the AFL. So I could get an email today and they've signed X, Y, Z, or I can get one in 3 weeks' time and they've signed another player. So it's sort of this is kind of a little bit of excitement. Like I think everyone in WAFL, we've all been hanging for the fixtures. Now the fixtures only came out last week. Now
I
in
saw that.
well, when I say the good old days, but in older days, I think 31st of October or thereabouts, you'd have your AFL fixtures, you'd have your WAFL fixtures, and straight away you're into your diary planning, what your forthcoming year is going to be. So now that we've got the fixtures, it probably feels a little bit more real and genuine about the fact that the season's nearly approaching us. I mean, this is February, so it isn't far away. I think we start on Good Friday against Swan District, so it's nice to know who we're playing and when we're playing, and we'll get different information from the club about what they've been up to. So got full faith in them, and look, I just hope East Perth have a good year. Improve on 2022. That's all you can ask from being down that part of the ladder.
Mm-hmm. Progression. That's the biggest thing. As long as you see improvement from season to season, 100%. Which kind of then goes into my next one is your thoughts on next year. As you kind of said, you don't think we're not dusting off the mantelpiece for a Premiership Cup. Not, I don't think we're looking at that. But as you kind of said, do you think this is an East Perth team, if they can get a couple of signings, maybe looks at sneaking into the bottom part of the finals?
Yeah, that would be wonderful. Hamish Brayshaw had a wonderful year last year, won our fairest and best, so he's got that WAFL experience from the West Coast WAFL team. A few ex-AFL players are sort of coming through. We've had our big ruckman Scott Jones spend time on a Fremantle list, so that, and we've also got some great youth coming through. And I think that's one of the beauties of all WAFL clubs, for that matter, is that they've got some good talent coming through. Now, if they don't get up to the AFL, which is obviously a lot of them go straight to the AFL, but a lot of them certainly do have the talent and the ways and means to make pretty good league careers. Now, whether that then means they might get drafted as a mature age, or whether they end up being a great WAFL player at 50, 100, 150 games. So there's always those prospects coming through. And East Perth were pretty handy in the Colts last year. So it'd be nice to see a few of those guys make their debut as well.
Awesome. All right. And I love this next one. This is a lot of fun. And it's even more interesting for me because I don't know the league as well. I love hearing names. So I'm going to have a little fun. For one day, I'm going to install you as the list manager for East Perth. Okay. All of the other clubs in the WAFL are completely free. You can sign one player away from any of the clubs in the WAFL to add to East Perth to maybe get them into the finals next year. Who's that one player and why?
Wow, what a question. Straight away, I think Jai Bolton from Claremont.
He's
A
been a popular
big-bodied.
one.
Is that right? Okay, well,
Yep.
at least we're
I think
consistent.
two of the three have said Jai Bolton, and the Claremont guy didn't because he already
Yeah.
has him. So
Well, he's
uh
very, very lucky. No, he's a super player, big-bodied midfielder, and got exquisite skills and performs on the big days. So, I think he won a Stimson medal in Claremont's loss to South Fremantle a couple of years ago in the grand final at state games. So, yeah, no, he's a beauty, Jai Bolton. So, gee whiz, him in black and blue. That's an entertaining prospect, Donnie. Thanks for that question. Can you make it happen?
I absolutely wish I could, but unfortunately, I think my Claremont friend might disown me if I actually did that. So alrighty. Unfortunately, I'm interested to ask you this because anybody that watches my show knows I am a huge advocate for the women's game. I think the AFLW is fantastic for footy. I think a lot of country footy clubs and footy clubs throughout the country have seen renaissances because of the AFLW and the inclusion in women's footy. And I'm sad to see, looking at it, unfortunately, East Perth does not have a WAFL W. So I'm going to change this question a tiny bit. Do you know why they can't have a WAFL W? And do you think it's on the horizon that the Royals will eventually get a WAFL W team?
It's certainly on the horizon. They've been playing in the Rogers Cup, and gee, I could be wrong here, Donnie. I've got a feeling we might be debuting in the women this year. I might be wrong there. I'd have to check, but I think the progression from the Rogers Cup, I think we are in the WAFL W this year. If not, we mustn't be too far away. And to take your point, like my own club here in Kalgoorlie Railways, we had our women's team for the first time in 2022, and what a difference it made to our club, a real positive difference it made to our club. They're so enthusiastic, they're so raw. I suppose they're not hung up with all the footy stuff that we know as being, people have been involved in footy for so long. It's like a new toy to them. So they brought a whole lot of enthusiasm, help around the club. We only won, I think, 3 games in our home and away, played a first semi-final, snatched a win, played in the preliminary final, snatched another win, and then got beaten by a far better team in the grand final. But just for those girls to be part of grand final day, it was like they were winners already. It was absolutely magnificent. So it was something that has been a great, a great injection to our club personally here at the Railways Footy Club here in Cal.
100%. Like I said, I do AFLW round reviews. I'm going to get into, I actually had the pleasure of talking with Norwood's captain for the Sandful W team, Ali Farrell, an absolutely fantastic woman. I loved her enthusiasm. So I'm going to try to keep track of the Waffle W and the Sandful W as well. The VFLW is a little bit easier because the AFL's connection with that. So I want to try to keep track of the women's, because I know that with this next AFLW draft being an overage draft, some of these leagues I think will really see where some of the talent will be drafted from, for sure. So I really love connecting. I think the women have an enthusiasm, like you kind of said. But I'll say this, and I might offend some people. I think the women go after the footy a little bit harder than the men at times. I think they are so excited to play. They go after the footy a little bit more psycho than some of the men do. But I appreciate that, because it means they want to play and they're excited to play. So absolutely love it. So we've talked plenty of waffle, but I talk a lot of AFL. So I'm going to have a few an AFL question here. You kind of let it slip out earlier. How in Sam Hill did a WA boy become a Melbourne Demons supporter? Number one.
Oh,
Why? And then do you also keep track of their women's team? Because, sir, you have a premiership in your midst with the women, with the Demon women this year.
yeah, I really need East Perth to pick their socks up, because I'm going through a bit of a golden run at the moment with the D's, my local club, the Scorchers that we mentioned. So I'm sick of winning, Donnie. No, I'm only joking. But look, again, on TV, we used to have a show called The Winners that used to come on Sunday nights between, I think it was 6 and 7 before the ABC News. And I fell in love with a guy called Robert Flower, who wore number 2 for Melbourne, because I was a little skinny wingman when I was a kid. So, just was mesmerised by this guy with such sublime skills and courage, because he wasn't a big guy. Used to bounce left-handed but kick right foot, and he could kick equally as well on his left. So I had a bit of a drawing towards the Melbourne Football Club because of Robert Flower, and then it just grew from that to a passion to now I'm a rabid Melbourne supporter, and I'm the luckiest guy in the world that I live in Western Australia. COVID struck, and here we are with a grand final in my own state, and I get to watch the D's break a 57-year drought. Yeah, it was unreal. Yeah, really good. And even from the women's point of view, back when it was just Melbourne and the Western Bulldogs as a foundation of women's, I was at a game at Docklands once, and they were playing for a cup. And Melbourne won this particular game. And I said to my mate, tongue-in-cheek at the time, I said, this might be the only time I ever see an on-field presentation with a trophy going towards the Melbourne Footy Club. So this would have been probably 10 years ago or thereabouts. But thankfully, as time's gone on, Donnie, I've seen that the men win a flag, and it was just magnificent to watch the Daisy Pearce-led D's win that low-scoring grand final against Brisbane earlier this year. So, and there's some wonderful players, amongst all in the AFLW, and even at our level here. So obviously we've got a lot of people playing footy for the first time, or netballers or basketballers. We've got a crop of young girls now that are sort of 12, 13 or 14. And when they start playing, the women's football here, they'll be playing as footballers, because that's all they've done through their juniors and all that. So when you're talking about going in, I mean, they'll probably go in a little bit more correctly, so to speak, put their body in the right position where obviously there's new girls, they see ball, get ball. So Yeah, very, very exciting. But yeah, back to the D's. It's been a long haul, long suffering. I think that's what we used to describe ourselves. And I think the first tweet that I put out after we won the grand final said, "Now I'm just a Melbourne supporter. I'm no longer long suffering." So yeah, no, it was magnificent. Got the tattoo, Donnie. That was my one agreement with my wife. She thought it would never happen. I said, if the D's win a flag, can I get a tattoo? Yeah, of course you can. Thinking that would never happen. So got a little Demons emblem on my left ankle, and yeah, and even like last year to go out in straight sets was disappointing. But I find myself sitting here on the deck, and it even happened after the Scorchers on Saturday night. A few beers in, cricket's over. What do you do? Yep, YouTube. Just whack on the last quarter and a half of the 2021 grand final and just watch the D's demolish the Dogs. So yeah, no, it's really really good. Love it.
And fantastic. I absolutely, again, it's always interesting I almost compare it to sometimes over in American sports is that is when you get somebody that lives in a city that's got a professional sport, but yet they find a way to be a fan of a completely different franchise. Because for me, it's weird for me because I'm kind of in a purgatory. I'm in a state that doesn't have any professional sport, no basketball, no baseball, no hockey, none of that, but I'm in like an epicenter of several different franchise areas with like NFL, Green Bay, Minnesota, Chicago, Denver, all of the NFL, NHL, St. Louis, Denver, Chicago, Minnesota. So it's but I most of my teams are nowhere close to me because I just decided to be weird, and I always choose my teams off of unique nicknames, and it's served me well. I've found franchises and I've found clubs that really have kind of connected to me personally, so it's worked out. So I just find it interesting. So to hear somebody else that kind of goes off a beaten path when it comes to their clubs, absolutely love it. So, all right,
No, I suppose I was just going to, sorry, Don, I was just going to say the other thing about that I continue to support Melbourne after the West Coast Eagles come in, because I'm a lover of the WAFL comp. I could see what damage the West Coast were going to do to the WAFL brand. So
gotcha.
that was part of the reason that I never jumped on West Coast and stayed with the team that I'd supported prior.
And it thought the same thing when Fremantle came in as well later.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I probably could have swapped to Fremantle at that time, but then I was that entrenched being a Melbourne supporter, and being a Melbourne supporter and being how bad we have been for so long. I think it's almost formed part of my character and personality that
Mm-hmm.
it became a conversation piece. There's Ian, the Melbourne supporter. Let's go and give him a hug because he probably needs one. So yeah, it sort of defined me a little bit. So I'm actually catching up with some friends shortly that I haven't seen for many years. So nice to be sort of rocking, and when they start talking about their teams winning premierships, I can be embraced and enjoy the conversation.
Yeah, and the best part is you can say you got two of them in 18 months with both the men and the women. So you got a
Yeah,
little bit of a, and the VFL I think also
and
did
the
win one
VFL
as
with
well. So it's
Casey.
like
Yeah, so
all three of them won a premiership in 18 months. That's
yeah.
pretty
So come on,
impressive.
East Perth, pick up your socks. I need that final bit of joy.
Yeah, you need that fourth ring, need the fourth ring on the hand. I love it already. So you kind of discussed the next topic that I have, because I was very fascinated. As you said, COVID kind of hit. So 2020 and 2021, the grand final for the AFL found itself outside of Victoria for the first time ever. And I was fascinated by the fact that Victorian media, which is very much, many people will say, Victorian biased. And again, I kind of understand it with 10 teams being there, a lot to talk about. I was shocked and somewhat surprised when this last grand final, or even in 2021, they started throwing out the topic of, after the 50-year contract, which again, I know it's a 50-year contract, comic session, calm down. Just stay with me here. We're going to suspend that 50-year contract for just a second. My thoughts for you, sir, is you got to you got to go to Optus Stadium and see a grand final in Optus Stadium. Are you one of those that, did it help you kind of think that maybe the grand final should be something we should look to become a traveling final, almost like the Super Bowl over here in the States? Or do you kind of like the tradition of the game being in the MCG?
Yeah, I like all of that, to be honest. I mean, the MCG holds 100,000 people. So, I mean, pretty much that's where the argument sort of starts and stops to a degree. But having seen it in Brisbane and in Perth, I think some commentators have suggested that, the agreement, the 50-year agreement is in place, but could it travel maybe once every 5 years or
Mm-hmm.
10 years or something like that? So
Or 4 years
I'm
like
not
the Olympics.
Yeah, so I'm certainly not against that. Poor old St Kilda. I know it'll happen. The year it travels, they'll make a grand final and they'll win it in Darwin or wherever it happens to be. But that doesn't matter.
Hmm.
Wherever you win it is wherever you win it. I mean, my guys won it in Perth, and for so many Melbourne supporters, they wanted to be there. So that's why they were so desperate for the D's to do well in 2022, which sadly we couldn't do the business. But yeah, I know why it's at the MCG because of the capacity of the ground, the tradition, and all that sort of stuff. But if it did move every so often, nah, I'd have no problem at all with that.
Yeah, as I've said to a few, it's like the one thing I noticed is many of the Victorians are very, very, very much. It must be here. The
Yeah,
interstate fans, I've noticed they're a lot more understanding and almost amenable to the thought process. Maybe some of my South Australian friends are like they just want it to happen there. So since Gabba Optus Stadium and they were crying for it in both of those 2 years. So in fact, actually, this is a great transition, Donnie, and you didn't even intend to do it. We're going to go to SA this year on round 5 for gather round. And again, don't get me started on the name. I don't think somebody thought about that super long time, but you can't steal magic round from the NRL. So I'm fascinated. All 9 games are going to be in South Australia, most of them at the Adelaide Oval, but a few find themselves at Stanfield Grounds and even one out in country South Australia. So as a WA person, what are your thoughts on gather round? Do you think it's a good idea? And then do you have any interest in maybe slipping over to SA and catching a few games?
yeah, I don't mind the idea at all. I reckon it's a great idea, and I think it's good that it's outside of Victoria because really Victoria pretty have gather around every week, so to speak. They've got so many games going on in Victoria. But South Australia is a wonderful venue for it. The Adelaide Oval is magnificent. I'm not sure if you've been out to Australia and seen it, but that is a sensational venue. They'll be playing a couple of games at Norwood Oval, which is just up the road, and that playing surface wise is as good as any ground going around. So obviously the capacities are going to be down that weekend at the suburban and at the country grounds is what they would have got if it went to sort of normal round of AFL. But no, I like the idea. I mean, it would work really well in Western Australia, obviously at Optus Stadium, which is just the most magnificent building. Uh, yeah, we are so lucky in Western Australia. After having the Wacker and Subiaco Oval, which were old and tired and not so spectator friendly venues at the end of their lifespan, to now have this magnificent clay pot looking stadium that fits nearly 60,000 people, and it was to the rafters there on Saturday night for the Scorchers. We're very lucky in WA to have that venue, so we'd certainly be able to host that. And even if it went to the regions, Bunbury just south of Perth, Hands Oval is a magnificent venue, so that would be able to hold 1 or 2 AFL games if need be. Rushton Park, just down the road at Mandurah, even Arena Joondalup would be able to cope with that. And then I suppose Brisbane would have to wait until they get a new stadium, which is obviously happening with the Olympics coming up. But could you take it elsewhere to Darwin and places like that? I suppose you could. Just the secondary venue, I suppose, might be the question up there. And Tassie, you've got 2 great venues down there in Launceston and Hobart. I really do like the idea. I think it's very good to have it out of Victoria, and New South Wales would cope with it as well. Wagga Wagga and places like that.
Mm-hmm.
They're very big on the AFL.
Yeah, it'll be very, very interesting to see how the second and third years go. If I'm hoping it's successful. I think SA loves their footy, so I think the
Yeah.
fan base. Plus, I've heard all the hotel. I listened to a SA podcast, the Rush Hour out of Adelaide, and they said all the hotels for that weekend are already sold out. That you cannot find a hotel in the CBD in downtown Adelaide at all for that particular round, which is fantastic news because that means people are coming to see the games. I just want to see as bigger crowds as possible because I know if for any reason it doesn't happen, could this bomb? I don't want it to. I really want it to be successful. I want SA to be able to benefit from this, but
Yeah.
it'll be fascinating to see how it goes. And then the other question that you would say is if you did do it in Tassie, if they do build the new stadium for the new Tassie license, that would give you 3. So it
Yes.
would be great to do a gather round because you could split 3 games at each place. You wouldn't have to worry about eating up the arena. The only thing though is that do you want to be in Tassie in April? That'd be the question.
Yes.
So we'll
Yeah.
have we'll have to see. Alrighty. So we've had our AFL questions. Now some fun ones for me. And as you kind of brought up here, I have not been to Australia. It is on my bucket list. It is something that I plan to do. And after getting a nice little message from an SA supporter, I think I'm going to try. My bucket list has now expanded to all of the big arenas in every state when it comes to it. I know it won't be cheap, but I think it would be worth the time because I seem to have gathered many a friend in many a state in Australia. So when I come over, I want to be ready when I
Yep.
go to the game to experience footy at its best. So I have two questions that I have to ask that I want your help with. I'm an American. We love our food at our sport. What is your go-to food when you go to the footy?
Hot dog and chips, I dare say. So it'll be right up your alley, Donnie. I reckon
Hmm.
you'll be able to cater that straight away. And obviously, a hot pie, like particularly at the MCG in Docklands, the 4 and 20 pie
Hmm.
is, yeah, like an angel's on your tongue. It's sensational. But yeah, certainly hot dogs, pies, and chips. That's the staple diet. And I believe it's all going to be a little bit cheaper this year too, which is good because it's the
Fantastic.
type of it's the type of food you do have to pay with a credit card these days.
Unfortunately, everything's going cashless the way it's going. Yeah, no, I've been surprised. Hot chips has been one of the most behind the pie. The hot chips has been the second most common answer, which I thought was absolutely fantastic. And then the other one, if you go to the footy, you got to have a seat at the footy. So I want to know if I'm going to pick my seats, where's the best place? Where's the ideal place to sit to watch the footy?
If you can get it, elevated centre wing, because then obviously you've got the whole ground left and right in front of you. Look, sitting behind the goals isn't the end of the world, but yeah, if you had one choice of can I sit anywhere, centre wing, probably even second level centre wing would be good depending on the stadium. So when
Mhm.
the umpire puts the ball in the air, well, hopefully they're still bouncing it, who knows? But when the siren goes and the umpire's got it up, Donnie, you're looking straight at the logo.
Fantastic. That'd be fantastic. And then the last question that I have for each of them, and I love this because I'm starting to make a list of these games because I want to try to find highlights of many of these games because I hear that they're the best. Favorite game of footy you have ever seen, live, on the telly, at the ground, doesn't matter. Favorite game of footy you have ever seen.
Very easy to answer that one, Donnie. The 2021 Grand Final at Perth Stadium, the mighty Melbourne Demons doing the business over the Western Bulldogs. Best night of my life. Best night of my life.
East Perth Nuffy, but he picks the Demons game. Absolutely love it. Fantastic. Well, Ian, oh, well, this has been just a fantastic conversation. I've absolutely loved your passion. I love how you've been able to help me learn about East Perth and about your passion for footy. So I genuinely thank you for hopping on the podcast today.
No, and as I said at the start, I generally thank you for having such an interest in a wonderful competition being the WAFL, and to go through each club is magnificent. And I hope I've done East Perth proud. The 2002 Grand Final was pretty good too, Donny. So it's
Hmm.
yeah up there with that Melbourne Demons win. Just in case the Royals faithful reckon I've just jumped ship for a sec, but nah. Love footy, love the contest, and I love chatting like this as well. So thank you so much for your interest in our great game.
I as I've said to many people is that I've fallen in love with the sport. It has grabbed a hold of me in ways that I didn't think possible. As I say, if you see my Twitter account, and the Swans know this quite well, the games, primetime games, sometimes on Friday and Saturday nights start 4 a.m. my time, and my crazy rear end sets my alarm for 15 minutes before first bounce, and I am up and I am watching. I will not miss the game. I will tell you the reason why after the podcast goes over because it's a funny story, but I've told it a few times, so I don't want people to listen to it again. So we will tell once we're done with this. Ladies and gentlemen, that is going to do it for another episode in my off-season supporter series. Again, I'm still finishing up. I still got a few WAFL, a few Sandful, and a few VFL clubs still to go. We are getting closer. A season review and an off-season review are coming before March and round one of the AFL season. And as I said earlier, we are looking to do recaps of the Sandful, the WAFL, and the VFL over this season this year. So we will be covering all of the top four leagues in footy down in Australia. As an American, I can't wait. This is going to be so exciting. So have a wonderful evening. Thank you for listening, and we will be back with another episode very, very soon.